10-minute murder.
Before Dorothea Puente became the serial killer known as the Death House Landlady, she was a little girl growing up in a deeply troubled family. Born in 1929, Dorothea was raised by two alcoholics, and throughout her childhood, her father would often stand in front of his own children and threaten to take his life. But he never followed through on this threat. Instead, when Dorothea was 8 years old, he died from a tuberculosis infection. The next year, his widow was killed in a motorcycle crash, and Dorothea spent the rest of her childhood in an orphanage where she suffered from repeated sexual abuse. At 16 years old, Dorothea left the orphanage to marry an older man, a soldier named Fred McFall, who had just returned to California after serving in World War II. That happy couple had 2 daughters. The first one was sent back to Sacramento to live with Dorothea's family, and the second one was quickly given up for adoption. The marriage only lasted for 3 years, and soon afterwards, Dorothea was arrested for the first time after she was caught paying for shopping with forged checks. She spent 3 months in jail and was released, and then she met her second husband, Axel Johansson. And Axel Johansson sounds like the lead singer of a rock band, but Axel was not a lead singer of a rock band. He was a seaman. And by seaman, I don't mean that, I mean he was a sailor. And while he was away, Dorothea would spend his money gambling with men she invited over to the house. And she also created an elaborate persona, pretending to be an Israeli and Egyptian woman, going by the name Tea Singola Niarda. Axel was concerned about his wife's well-being, so he had her hospitalized, where she was diagnosed as a pathological liar. After she was then divorced for the second time in her life, Dorothea created another identity for herself. This time, she was a modest, traditional Christian by the name of Sharon Johansson. Acting as Sharon, Dorothea attempted to become a trusted member of the local community, opening up her home to women who were suffering from domestic violence or poverty. The deception worked, and before long, Sharon was known as a caring, selfless woman. Dorothea's next relationships ended in similar ways. The third, after a messy divorce resulting in a man fleeing to Mexico, and the fourth marriage only lasting a week. After that third divorce, Dorothea fully committed to appearing to be a trusted member of the community, wearing dated clothing and reading glasses, and growing her gray hair out to appear older than she actually was. She decided to open up a full-blown boarding house in Sacramento, which she advertised as a refuge for the homeless, the mentally ill, and those struggling with addiction. There was no reason for the people around to suspect otherwise. Dorothea even ran AA meetings from the boarding house, helped people sign up for Social Security benefits, and helped to fund scholarships and charities. In 1978, Dorothea was arrested for illegally cashing her tenants' checks and was sentenced to 5 years of probation. She'd spent her entire adult life lying, conning, and manipulating others. It seemed to be the only way that she was able to earn a living, and her arrest and time on probation did not change that. Before long, she was back to her old ways, slipping drugs into the drinks of elderly people to incapacitate them before stealing their cash, credit cards, and jewelry. On the 28th of April, 1982, a 61-year-old woman who had been staying with Dorothea for 2 weeks suddenly died after consuming enough codeine to cause her to stop breathing. Although her death was ruled as an undetermined overdose, Ruth Monroe would later be counted as Dorothea Puente's first murder victim. 3 months after Ruth passed away, Dorothea was back in prison for theft. While she was behind bars, she started writing letters to a 77-year-old man in Oregon named Everson Gilmouth. He became completely devoted to her and wanted to help out in any way possible. By the time she was released in September 1985, Everson was waiting outside to pick her up. In October, Dorothea sent a letter to Everson's sister, letting her know that she and Everson would be getting married the following month. Shortly after sending the letter, Dorothea hired a handyman, Ismael Flores, who she asked to build a 6-foot-long storage box. As well as a cash payment, she promised that she would allow him to keep Everson's vehicle in exchange for his services. If it had occurred to Ismael that the dimensions of the box were uncannily similar to the size and shape of a coffin, he did not express his concerns. When he returned the next day to find that Dorothea had put something inside the box and then nailed it shut, he didn't say anything about that either. In fact, when Dorothea asked Ismael for his help transporting the box, which was several hundred pounds heavier than it had been, he either genuinely wasn't suspicious or he didn't care. Dorothea left the box on the shores of the Sacramento River, where it remained undiscovered until January of 1986. The box, of course, contained the body of Dorothea's soon-to-be husband, Everson Gilmouth. In early 1988, 51-year-old Alvaro Gonzalez Montoya, known as Bert, came to stay with Dorothea in the boarding house. Shortly afterwards, an application was filed for Dorothea to be the payee for Bert's government benefits. The last time anybody saw Bert was the 24th of August, 1988. After that, he missed a series of important appointments, and his social worker was unable to reach him. The social worker became suspicious, so Dorothea asked an acquaintance to pose as Bert's brother-in-law, hoping to smooth things over. Claiming that he was Bert's brother-in-law, Michael Abergon, Dorothea's acquaintance contacted the social worker saying that he had recently dropped Bert off in Utah. The ruse did not work. The social worker was even more suspicious about what had happened to Bert and told Dorothea that she was going to the police. On the 7th of November 1988, the police interviewed one of Dorothea's former residents, John Sharp, hoping to find out more information about Bert Montoya's disappearance. John insisted that he had only seen Bert just a few days ago, but he passed a note to one of the officers that was handwritten, and it read, "She's making me lie." 4 days later, a detective arrived at Dorothea's boarding house and noticed an area of the garden where the soil appeared to have been recently disturbed. He asked Dorothea if he could dig up the soil, and she agreed. But half an hour later, when the detective dug up the first set of human remains, Dorothea managed to slip away from the authorities. Posing as a harmless old woman, she was able to disappear. The forensic investigation into Dorothea's property was seemingly endless. What had started as a search for one missing man became a grim discovery of poorly buried corpses, all belonging to vulnerable people who had genuinely trusted Dorothea. Bert Montoya's body was found in the southeast corner of Dorothea's yard, buried next to another missing person, Leona Carpenter. Next to the shed was a cement-filled hole where the remains of 55-year-old Benjamin Fink were found, and 61-year-old Vera Faye Martin was buried directly underneath the shed. Near Dorothea's rose bushes, there was a heavy concrete slab which covered the body of 65-year-old Dorothy Miller. Another victim, 78-year-old Betty Mae Palmer, had been dismembered and buried in a shallow grave, but despite an extensive search, her feet, hands, and head were never found. Forensic examination of the victims revealed that they had each been killed by a drug overdose, often using the sedative drug flurazepam, which is often used to treat insomnia. After their deaths, they had been wrapped up in plastic sheets and bed linen before being dragged outside to be buried in the yard. While investigators were searching for human remains on her property, Dorothea remained on the run for 5 days until she was discovered at a Los Angeles motel under a fake name. She was initially only charged with the killing of Bert Montoya, but the complaint was quickly amended, adding charges for 9 counts of murder and officially qualifying the case for the death penalty. Still, Dorothea pleaded not guilty. By the conclusion of Dorothea's trial, the court had seen testimonies from more than 150 witnesses and viewed more than 3,000 exhibits. On the 26th of August, 1993, Dorothea Puente was convicted for 3 of the killings. But even after more than a month of deliberation, the jury remained deadlocked on 6 more murders. Dorothea managed to escape execution. Instead, she received a life sentence without parole. While in prison, Dorothea achieved something that she had stolen from each of her victims. At 82 years old, she died peacefully of natural causes. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe. That's my name. I'm the host, and thank you so much for listening to my little podcast. If you're brand new, I'm happy that you're here. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening right now. When you become a subscriber, by the way, it's absolutely free. Doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. When you become a subscriber, you can more easily catch up on all the back episodes. And plus, when I release new episodes, like if you were a subscriber before this one came out, you would automatically know about it because it would be right there waiting for you to listen to it. Connect with me on social media, and there you'll see the pictures of what we talk about here on the podcast. And don't worry, because I don't post gross stuff or graphic stuff. And lastly, the best way to help this show grow is to spread the word. Let your friends and family know all about 10-Minute Murder, and that helps more than you know. Quickly, an email question for today. Hello, Joe. Thanks for doing this podcast because my ADHD brain wouldn't be able to let me listen to longer shows. Yours is perf. Anyway, the real reason for this email, as a guy, and assuming you aren't a pilot, if the pilot passed out or had a medical emergency, do you think you could land the plane? Emily in Manchester. And Emily, what a weird question. I know I couldn't land the plane. I've flown a plane, like with my hands. I've flown it like sitting in a little two-seat plane. Someone that I knew was a pilot took me up and let me fly around for a couple of minutes. I didn't take off. I didn't land. I just maneuvered the plane a little bit, and we came down. I didn't take off, and I didn't land. And even with that limited knowledge, there's absolutely no way I could land a plane. Have you been inside of a cockpit? All the buttons and the gauges and the knobs and the dials, and some of them aren't labeled. No, there's no way I could land a plane. I could keep it up in the air long enough that would let everyone tell their friends and families goodbye because things are not about to go well, but I could not land it, no. And I feel like this is Emily, are you trying to trick me? I feel like this is a trick question. Like you've asked me something, you're setting me up for some kind of answer, you're going to psychoanalyze me or I don't know. But thank you for your email anyway. That's going to do it. That is today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.